So now we're going to get started with the input tag. The input tag in HTML is a singleton tag. So it starts with our opening bracket, the word input, and it ends with a forward slash in our closing bracket. It does not have a closing partner like many of our other options do. The input tag has several different attributes that we can utilize. We're going to focus right now on three of them, and we'll talk about a few more a little later on. The first and one of the most important is the type attribute. And the type attribute is the attribute that tells us what kind of information we're going to be taking from the user. We're going to start out with the basic and default value, which is text. If I don't specify a type attribute, it will automatically be text. So we'll make this a text attribute. The next attribute that we want is an ID. So the ID, I'm just going to call input right now because we're going to take a variety of different things here. So actually, we can just call it example. Um, the ID has to be unique on the page. In other words, no other HTML attribute on the page can have an ID with the same name. That ID attribute will be useful to us later when we talk about or working on forms with JavaScript, when we talk about styling forms with CSS, and even just later in this lecture, where we talk about how to help our users interact better by using label tags. The third attribute that we want to focus on is the name attribute. The name attribute is the one that's used when we're processing the form. So when we submit the form and the information either gets sent by GET or by POST to our thanks.html page, the value of the name attribute will be the variable name in which the input from the user is actually stored. Most often, we can have our name attribute value be the same as our ID value in an element. So we'll put a BR tag here. We'll refresh. I'll come in here and I'll type this is text. And we submit that to our new page and it says thank you. So let's talk about some of the different options that we can have inside of the type attribute. So as we've seen, inside the type attribute, we can have text. That's one option. Another option would be password. So if I come up here and make this a password option, then you'll see it looks exactly the same. We will still get on a mobile device, we'll get our alpha keyboard. But when I type here, this is text, you'll see that it turns into dots so that prying eyes behind you cannot read the information that you're submitting. Another option for the type attribute is date. And so on many browsers, when we do this, we immediately get a month, DD, and YYYY for a year. But many browsers also provide us then with a drop-down calendar that we can use. And so I can just go back in time here, pick January 8th, 2019, make that my birthday. Or if I was born in 2018, I can then come in here and use the arrows to change that, or I can just type over this section 2000 or 2000, 2010. So 1/8/2010 is what I would be submitting as my birth date. The next one would be a time option. The time option then gives us the format in time, so we can use the arrows here to choose 4 o'clock, and then we can type 30. And then this option here is AM or PM. So we've got that option right there when we use the time for type. Another option here would be email. If we use an email type, it looks very much like a password type. The difference is that if we were on our mobile device, we would get the mail keyboard, which looks like our alpha keyboard, but typically has the @ sign and a .com button that we can use. There are also some differences when we require this. We'll take a look at that later. So email is an option. We can also do phone, and we can do number as well. Those are our last two options for the type attribute. Now, there's a few other attributes that we can utilize here. One of them is placeholder. And the placeholder attribute gives us text to appear before the user types, almost like a prompt would. So if I come in here and I type placeholder and I say home email and I refresh, now it prompts the user to say, okay, look here, put a home email in here. And as soon as I start to type and I type email at net.com, then I've got this going on right here. So as soon as I get rid of that information, the placeholder will come back. So it's grayed out text used as a prompt to help our user understand what it is that we want them to put. Another option would be to, instead of using placeholder, use something called value. And if I use value, this is very different now because now this is a value that's sitting in here, not a placeholder. If I want to type over it, I have to actually highlight and delete the whole thing to replace it with asdf@mail.com. If I go back and get rid of it, then that value is gone. But when I refresh the page, that value will be back. The last two that I want to show you here is that I can use one called required. Required equals required. And what that will do is it will not allow me as a user to submit until I have met some certain qualifications. Sometimes the qualification is just having put something in there. But in the case of email, it's a little different. It says, hey, you need to have an at sign here. So I do ASDF at. It continues to tell me that I need something after the at sign, so ASDF.com. It does not require a .com or a .org, but it does require some semblance of a formatted email. The last one then that we can use here is disabled equals disabled. And what that does is it shows our value, but it means we cannot edit it. So maybe we've calculated somebody's cost that they have to pay and we want to show that to them, or they've entered information earlier that we don't want them to be able to change, but we want to show it as part of the form. We can put that in there and disable it so that the user cannot alter the information that's there. So that's the input tag, and stay tuned for more information on forms.